Hi, and welcome to the inaugural webinar of the Hampton Roads Open Data Initiative. As you can see, your audio is off, but we'll be happy to take comments and questions at the end of the webinar via the chat function, which is enabled. For those of you who are new to this, the Hampton Roads Open Data Initiative is a one-year volunteer effort aimed at raising awareness in the Hampton Roads area of the potential value of open data. We like to say we're promoting economic and community development, and that our target audiences vary from the entrepreneurial sector to the nonprofit sector, with governments at all levels and academia also in the mix. Today we're going to focus on the entrepreneurial section and discuss how studying open data examples can be beneficial. We're also going to provide a resource for doing that on your own. Before we go on, however, we'd like to introduce ourselves. My name is Rick Jones, and I'm a local data science consultant and one of the co-founders of the Hampton Roads Open Data Initiative. I'm also a huge open data enthusiast. I think that open data offers the region a fantastic opportunity to improve economic and social outcomes across the board. Karen?
Good morning, everybody. I'm Karen Lindquist, and I come from an academic background. I teach business and management courses like strategic thinking, and I research mega trends that impact the way we do business. So I joined this project because open data and data science are an exciting new wave of economic potential already causing a sea change in the way business is done. We see that. We also realize that managers and employees of all kinds are going to need data literacy skills to compete in the new economy that's taking shape right now and unfolding all around us. And I want to see our region, Hampton Roads, riding this wave rather than being swept along by it. So I am super excited to be part of this project. Rick.
Okay. As I mentioned a few minutes ago, today we're going to focus on the entrepreneurial sector. And what we're going to do is discuss the opportunities we see that can come from studying how other businesses use open data. We're going to go over 3 business cases that provide examples of these opportunities. And finally, we're going to review the Open Data 500 website, show you how to use it to dig deeper into how other businesses are using open data. This is a great resource. We love it, and we encourage everybody to learn how to use it. Before we do that, however, we want to make a quick mention of our next webinar, since some of you may have to sign off today before the end today. Karen?
Sure. Be sure to mark your calendars. It will be next month, Tuesday, October 4th at 11:30 a.m. And we are going to have a guest panelist with us. His name is Fraser Picard, and Fraser is the technology manager for the city of Norfolk. And Fraser is in charge of adopting a data sharing platform called Socrata, and migrating Norfolk's data onto this platform. And so he's going to explain to us why they're choosing the platform, what it does for them, what they hope to achieve for it, and then he's going to give us a progress report on the rollout. Pretty interesting, so be sure to be with us next month too.
Okay. The start point for any discussion about the value of open data is usually the 2013 McKinsey Global Institute study. It estimated there's $3 trillion of value in open data just waiting to be unlocked. Value ranges from that generated by new products and services to the value that consumers realize in making more informed decisions by using open data applications. Since that report came out, hundreds of companies have developed new products and services using open data. So if you're thinking about starting an open data company, we see tremendous opportunity in studying what some of these other companies are doing. In doing so, you might be able to avoid reinventing the wheel. And specifically, you might be able to A, find an application that you see fits the area and replicate it lock, stock, and barrel. B, you might be able to set up a licensing or franchise agreement with some application. Or finally, you might be able to take an idea and, using your imagination, adapt it to fit unique regional considerations. So we're going to look at 3 companies, and for each one, we're going to look at, each one provides a different model for being used. In looking at these companies, we're going to use a 6-part template you see on the screen, and we're going to cover what sector they're in, like healthcare, aerospace. We'll discuss the problem that they're addressing. We'll talk about the solution they've come up with to address the problem and the product that embodies that solution. We'll talk about their revenue model, and finally, the impact that that product or service is having. So the first company we're going to take a look at is a company called Aiden. As you might guess from the homepage, Aiden is in the healthcare sector. Aiden's a small company located in New York. It was only recently founded in 2011 with just a handful of people. They're currently listed as having between 1 and 10 people. So the problem that Aiden is addressing was actually recently illustrated in a Washington Post article. And that problem is that when patients in the acute care sections of hospitals are discharged, they are often not properly placed. Again, this was an article from just about 5 months ago in the Washington Post talking about how difficult it is when patients are discharged from an acute care ward. And specifically, some of the issues that might happen if they're not properly placed is that their medicines might get accidentally mixed up, symptoms might get missed, and complications might inadvertently be allowed to develop. In extreme cases, the patients can die. So an example would be if a patient is in an acute care scenario with kidney problems, and if they were to get discharged and put into a nursing home or with a home health care worker that specializes in cardiac problems, some of these issues might arise. So the solution that Aiden came up with was that they looked in the Medicare data set that's part of the Health and Human Services department, and they found 2 small data sets, Home Health Compare and Nursing Home Compare. Both of these data sets have historical data, reviews, inspections from the Food and Drug Administration, et cetera, that compare various home healthcare providers and various nursing homes. And so what Aiden did was they developed an application that integrated these 2 databases and then tailored that to a specific region. So currently Aiden is basically limited to the New York market. So a New York hospital would be able to query the local home health care providers, local nursing homes to place their patients accurately. Aiden's revenue model is they license their software. They license it for $6,000 annually to a hospital. And the impact has been that hospitals are saving up to $145,000 each, and readmission rates are declining up to 17%. So this is really a great success story. Actually, it's, in my view, a poster child for the kind of application that can be replicated, because healthcare is one of the top 10 industries here in Hampton Roads. We've got Riverside, we've got Bon Secours, we've got Centara. And the acute care discharge problem is not unique to any particular region. It exists everywhere, and it certainly exists here in Hampton Roads. Furthermore, the data that Aiden uses isn't proprietary. It can be found on the Health and Human Services Medicare website, and it can be used by anyone. And finally, the application can be easily replicated for regional use. It strikes me as something that if you can play around with the database and if you can write basic software, you can probably replicate this here. And it's not hard to see that if somebody got this application going here in Hampton Roads, it could expand to the Richmond area, it could expand down to the Research Triangle area. It could actually become a complete Tidewater application. So again, Aiden is, in my view, a poster child for the type of open data application that can be easily replicated for use in many places. And now we're going to take a look at a different kind of model. Karen?
Many thanks. And Rick, can you enable my ability to click through these slides, please?
Let me see if I can do that.
While you do that, I'll start talking. So our second
Sure.
example here, thank you. This is a company called Trial X. And Trial X was founded in New York just about 9 years ago, and it still apparently has a pretty small staff. They are achieving very big things, though. So let's look at our model again here. The Trial X, again, is in the healthcare sector. And the problem that they are addressing is cancer patients having a really difficult time finding the appropriate clinical trials. And let me tell you a little bit more about this problem. And you can read about this in the New York Times, this article here, Clinical Trials Need Cancer Patients, if you want to know more. So many cancer patients can't benefit from traditional treatments available to them in their area. And it's either because their cancer is rare or it's untreatable for some reason, or maybe they're not responding to treatment, or they're at advanced stages, or they just don't want the traditional treatment. So these patients are willing and even desperate candidates for alternative drugs and therapies, some of which are new and experimental, and some of which exist in other countries, but they have to undergo clinical trials before they can be approved in the United States. So the problem is that while the information for all of these clinical trials, it's published for free on the National Cancer Institute and National Health Institutes and even others' websites, but it's really difficult to access, and it's really hard to understand, and it's difficult to communicate with the researchers. I even tested it out. I did a little search on leukemia, and the results that I got back were written in thick medical jargon, and for me, it was as hard to read and understand as a doctor's handwriting. Meanwhile, clinical researchers are having difficulty recruiting patients for their trials and screening the patients for suitability and keeping track of all of their applicants. Without meaning to, they often drop the ball for qualified participants along their process. I've had a lot of clinical researchers in my management courses, and they all tell me the same thing, that the biggest challenge is getting and keeping enough qualified participants to complete a study. And in fact, 8 out of 10 clinical trials fails to reach the target number of participants to have an effective study. And this problem exists everywhere in the world. And we experience it strongly in the United States, and we feel it right here in Hampton Roads. And Rick, you mentioned you met an oncologist recently who can attest to this problem.
I did, Karen. Back in February, probably, maybe March, I went to an ODU Business Gateway networking event at Bon Secours, and I happened to meet Dr. Bradley Prestige, the medical director there for the Cancer Institute. He had only recently moved up from Texas, and I started talking to him. Everybody was hanging around the lobby having hors d'oeuvres and wine, and I started talking to him, and I mentioned that New York Times article that you just referred to, and I asked him his opinion. And he said, absolutely. He said this is something he thinks about all the time with cancer patients. How can they find the medical trials, the clinical trials that could possibly help them? Now, his job as a researcher is not to solve that problem, but he just said he sees and has seen so many cancer patients who could really benefit from knowing about these trials and how to find them. And it bothers him that it's so difficult for cancer patients to find the trials.
So how does Trial X use open data to address this problem? Their solution is to take all of this freely available data from the different sources, and they put it together into one standardized source for the patients. The service is called Dory, like Finding Dory. Dory helps doctors and patients easily find relevant clinical trials based on a number of search filters. The information is presented in plain layman's terms so patients can understand it, and I tested it again. I did a search, and sure enough, it's something that even I could understand. Each search result also includes a link that puts the patient directly in touch with the head investigator of the clinical trial, including a Google Map link to their clinic, which, by the way, that's also open data, use of open data for business. So while there are other like competing nonprofit and commercial organizations that also provide similar services, this Dory service has won awards for its innovation and simplicity and ease of use. But TrialX doesn't make money from Dory. This service is free to patients and doctors, and as it should be. I mean, that would be a little bit unethical, charging money for this, but, or let's say questionable ethics. TrialX makes money by licensing a software platform they called iConnect to the institutes that conduct the clinical trials. So these institutes get a tracking system that manages candidates through the screening process and a dashboard to keep statistical track of all their trials, and they get help writing the recruiting language for the trials so that it's easy to understand. So, but then of course, what's interesting for these people, why would they want to work with TrialX? Why would they want to use iConnect? Is because TrialX is attracting all of the patients to their website through their free service. So that's their revenue model there. In terms of impact, well, there's certainly the business impact of the companies that are having clinical trials for treatments being able to complete their trials, get their treatments approved, and be able to start making money from their treatments. But of course, there's a much bigger social impact in terms of saving lives. Immediately connecting more people to the trials, so possibly more people will be able to benefit from these experimental treatments and survive their diseases. But as more and more of these treatments become approved, you have an even greater exponential impact to save more lives along the line. So why should we care about that? Well, there's an opportunity here for some enterprising individual to actually maybe franchise this service. TrialX has already been up and running for 9 years. And they're very successful. So you probably don't want to reinvent the wheel and try to compete with the other services that are out there as well. But TrialX is still a small team, and they're really only selling their services right now in the New York and Philadelphia area. So some enterprising individual with some gumption, whose network maybe touches on the healthcare industry, could quite easily contact TrialX and offer to expand their service into Hampton Roads, where it's needed, and you could even work out from there, Virginia, maybe down the eastern seaboard. That is a second opportunity, a second way to take advantage of companies that are already operating in the open data sphere. And Rick, you've got the third example.
I do. The third example is a company called Visual DoD. Visual DoD was founded in 2012 in Reston, Virginia, a small company. I would mention now it's since been acquired by McKinsey. But what Visual DoD does is it's in the aerospace and defense, as you might guess by the title. The problem they were addressing is that defense contracting and spending is hugely jargon-laden and information-rich. To try, as you can imagine, $100 billion spent every year, there's just lots of documentation, and it's really difficult to go through all that documentation and figure out exactly what the trends are. And this is something that the big defense contractors, the Boeings, the Northrop Grummons, the Lockheeds, really care about. They care about what the trends in defense contracting are. So what Visual DoD did was it found a way to go through all that documentation, collect it, standardize it, and integrate it to be able to illustrate visually what the trends in defense spending were, so that the large defense contractors could make their strategic decisions. What they did was they came up with both a software application and a cloud-based web application, the first of which they licensed and the second of which they had a subscription service for. And in terms of the impact, let's just say that McKinsey Consulting bought them out. So they obviously were very, very successful at some level. So why do we care? Hampton Roads is one of the biggest military regions in the nation. everybody knows we've got, naval bases galore. We have Langley Air Force Base. We have shipbuilding, ship repair. This is a huge region for defense contracting. Our defense contractors tend to be smaller. We probably have offices of Northrop Grumman and Boeing and Lockheed here, but we also have a lot of very small contractors. This website is just showing defense contractors from Chesapeake, and I think there were a total of 60 on here, from just one-person shops up to small businesses with a dozen or 15 people. And the defense budget is close to $600 billion this year. So this is an example, a lot of which is going to come to Hampton Roads. This is an example of an application that you're not going to replicate it. It was so successful, it was already bought. However, our defense contracting problem is a little different down here. We have a lot of smaller defense contractors, but they all still suffer from information overload. If you've talked to any of the defense contractors or even tried to get into it yourself, you'll know that monitoring FedBiz Daily and reading all of the DoD news releases and stuff can just be overwhelming. So this is the kind of application where it would be quite possible to take the basic idea of collecting, cleaning, standardizing, integrating, and filtering DoD contracting data and creating an application that targets the unique kind of defense contractor that Hampton Roads has, which is the small defense contractor, or possibly the medium size, but typically the small. Anyway, those are the three examples that we wanted to show you. One on how to pick an application and just replicate it lock, stock, and barrel. One that lends itself to franchising, and one that lends itself to adaptation. And now we're going to talk about how to
We promised a resource. So the OD 500 Global Network is a group of organizations studying the use and impact of open data. It's sponsored and coordinated by the Governance Lab, or govlab.com. And by mapping the use of open data within and across countries, they wanted to find new approaches for understanding the economic and social impact of open government. Now, when you click on the United States, if you go to their website, it's opendata500.com. When you go to their website, and you click on the United States, the first thing you see is this sort of dream catcher graphic. And they call it the Open Data Compass. It's really interesting because it maps which companies are using which types of data provided by which federal agencies for which purposes and to what benefit. And when you're on the website, you can mouse over the graphic and you can see the different paths being highlighted. Now, if I select full data from the menu that I see on the screen, this is what I get. I get a map of the US on the left, and this is an interactive map, so you can filter companies that use open data by state, registered companies that use federally provide open data. So white states like West Virginia and South Carolina, you see there on the map, they have 0 registered companies. And darker states like New York, it has 106 companies. California has 132. And Virginia is not too bad there compared with our neighbors. We've got 22 companies registered using open data. 21 of those, however, are located in Northern Virginia, and only 1 is in Richmond. Wouldn't it be nice to see some Hampton Roads companies appearing here? But let's get back to the resource for you here. I can actually click on Virginia and I can see which companies are using open data. I could also just click, for example, in the middle column there, I could filter by industry sector. If I'm interested in a particular industry, I could see what players there are and how they are using open data, or I could click on the federal agency column and I could see, well, what kind of data do they provide and who's using it and how might I take advantage of it. So this is useful for innovators and entrepreneurs because it's a great source of ideas for something you could replicate or offer to franchise or sell, or something you could scale differently, just as we discussed earlier with our examples. Or maybe if you have a wild new idea, you could search here for federal sources of information, or you could look at who your competitors might be. So this is a wonderful resource. When you actually do filter the information, the results appear in these tiles here. And you can either like filter to get just the tiles you want, or you could do like we have here. You could just scroll down through the entire list, and they're all listed there alphabetically. When you click on a tile, you get to more information about the company. And here's one that I found located in Northern Virginia. You can find out a lot about the company, and you could visit its website to find out more. But the problem with this kind of search is that when I try to go back to my filtered list, I get the full list of companies, so I have to click the filter and start all over again. So Rick has a better solution for using this data set.
Indeed. When I first discovered the Open Data 500 website, I spent a lot of time doing just what Karen described. I would look at a company, and then I'd have to go all the way back and reset the filter. And then I found out there's a much easier way to do this. At the top of the web page, there's a link for actually downloading the data sets as CSV, or comma separated values files. So I downloaded right there in the middle where it says all companies CSV. I clicked on that, and I downloaded a CSV file, which I was then able to open using Excel. And I think this might be probably not, this might be a little blurry on the screen, but as you can see, it's a spreadsheet. And across the top, we have column names, which include company name, the URL of the website, the year they were founded, the city, the state, the number of employees, and so on, including the revenue source, the description, the product type. And so what you can do, because this is in Excel, you can actually use Excel's native sorting and filtering functions to look for specific types of companies. In this case, what I did was sorted on revenue type, and it got all the companies that make their money by software licensing right there in a block. And so I was able to look to the left to see what sectors they were, and continuing on to see what the company names were. And when I found companies that I wanted to look at, I could go all the way over and look at their capture their URL, and then go online and look at them. And if you see at the bottom of that box, you might not be able to read it, but the bottom company there is Visual DoD, which we talked about. So this, to me, this CSV file is a fantastic resource for exploring these 500 open data companies based on any number of ways you want to look at the data, be it product type, revenue model, sector, whatever. There are just a number of ways you can look at the data this way. So to recap, what we talked about today was how looking at other businesses use open data can be useful, specifically because you can find some applications that can be replicated, some applications that lend themselves to either licensing or regional franchises, and some applications that can inspire your imagination to develop some adaptation to fit our unique market. And then we looked at the Open Data 500 website, where you can query hundreds of companies based on a number of different interesting aspects to find companies that might fit into what you're looking for. And that pretty much wraps up our webinar today. Just a quick reminder that the next webinar is going to be Tuesday, October 4th. Fraser Picard from the City of Norfolk is going to talk about what Norfolk is doing to roll out their open data, as well as their Socrata portal and the status of that. And now we are ready to entertain questions if anybody has any.
So if you if you roll your mouse over the bottom of your screen, you should have a menu popping up with the ability to chat. There's a little chat bubble there, and if you click on it, Ilya found it already.
Ilya has chat. Okay, I don't see it.
So Ilya, at the beginning of the webinar, typed, "Hi, hello, good to hear you." There's also a Q&A button you can try as well if you'd like to type something in there. Yeah, so Elias says, the companies you gave, they all used open data, question mark, including the last company about defense.
That's correct. That's correct. So is your question, what open data did they use?
Probably, yes.
Okay, so what they do is there's a lot of open government data there. The government publishes the budget. I mean, the defense budget is open data, as is most of the government budget. So they use the budget. They use things coming out of news releases. They use contract awards. They use requests for proposals. They take all that stuff, and which is all open, all available for anybody to use, and they try to integrate it to the point that they can actually plot trends. Does that answer the question?
He says, thank you.
Okay. Anybody else? Well then, I guess I'm going to stop the recording, and we will have this posted on the website, hopefully within the next day or two, if you would like to go back and review this. And we're both available to answer more questions by email if you want to do that. So Karen, do you have any final words?
I just want to thank everybody for attending. Hope we were able to spark some ideas with you, and hope we'll see you next month.
Okay, thank you all.